Hey there guys, I'm Jonathan from Blender HD, and I wanted to give you a breakdown of how I built the idea and composition of my latest render. So I hope that this video is helpful to anybody who is stuck in the creative process and maybe isn't sure how to get started on a scene. So there are a lot of tutorials out there about compositional rules and things like that, but there don't seem to be many with practical examples about how to apply those rules in real situations and in your own projects. So I knew when I started this project that it had to be about steampunk because it was going to be for Andrew Price's steampunk competition on blenderguru.com. So I figured, yeah, I should join, but I didn't have an idea. So I went a couple weeks without thinking of anything, and so I just didn't start a project. But I knew that the next render I created, I wanted to have a key focus on storytelling and have a little bit behind the image besides something that's just simple and maybe looks cool. I wanted to have a little bit deeper meaning. So I didn't know whether that would be, dark and creepy or light and fun. Who knows? It was just up to anything. So I started thinking about steampunk. And steampunk got me thinking about robots, because those are always cool. And robots got me thinking about drones, which got me thinking about Muse's new album Drones, which I was listening to, and that was pretty sick. And I was in art class for one of my college classes, and the person next to me had created this picture that reminded me of Muse's album. And it had the faces kind of scratched out, and there were paint drips kind of dribbling down, and it was really dark and really interesting looking. But they turned it upside down, and it looked like little marionettes. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea. So I sort of flipped that around in my head, upside down, and thought, maybe I should do something like that. Then I thought, what does that really mean to me as a person, though? And so I got all philosophical and crap, and I was like, well, are people autonomous, or is there a bunch of free will? Is there something that we feel is trying to hold us down and is really controlling us? That could be rules, law, God, whatever. And so we try to be all rebellious and cut those ties, but those might be the things that were holding us up all along. So that's kind of the random path that my brain took, and I wanted to create a picture that showed that meaning. I started sketching, and as you can see, the sketches weren't particularly good. That's not the point. I wasn't trying to create a masterpiece because I didn't think I was going to show these to anybody. These were just really quick gestural sketches to get those ideas out on paper. And so at first I tried to create, the whole scene just really quickly, just blocking out, okay, the character's here, this might be a wall, this might be another person, this might be stairs, things like that. So I had that scene and I got ideas out on paper and I started to flesh it out a little bit. So once I had a rough idea of exactly what I wanted to do, I started creating it in 3D. Well, back up a little bit. First, I looked at lots of references, because with a themed competition or piece or whatever, I wanted to make sure that I got it kind of right. I didn't want to, do the same thing as everybody else, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I really got the theme and stuck with it. So I started creating the main character. I built him up from the most important areas first and built from there. So I wanted to make sure that the hands and the face were the most detailed. The reason for that is because those are the most expressive parts and they were going to be key focal areas in my picture. So I wanted to make sure that those were the most detailed, and I wanted to spend the most time on those and maybe things last. So I did that throughout the entire picture. I started with the hands, face, ribs, and started with the character mainly, and then went ahead and did the background and things like that, which are a lot less detailed, and maybe, in this case, might even be a little bit too simple, but it's a lot better than the background being really detailed where nobody really cares, and the foreground looking like crap. So that's the way I went about it, and just focused on the areas that people's eyes are most likely going to be drawn to, and the most expressive and important for telling the story. Then I blocked out the composition, literally with blocks, so just cubes or cylinders, whatever, and just put them into what I thought would be a good composition. So this first composition was a little bit like my first sketch. I had the character in the right third, and the bridge was balancing on the left, and it seemed pretty good, but something was really bothering me about it. There was no character to it. It seemed really bland and boring, and it was really busy. There was no room for the picture to breathe, and it just was not exciting at all. So then after a couple more iterations, I ended up with this composition, which is a lot more balanced and has a good negative space, which brings attention to his face and to the hand. So a couple things that I did really intentionally here was I tilted the camera, which makes us a little bit uneasy as viewers, which normally you wouldn't want to do, but in this case, this character is kind of crazy, right? So I wanted to help drive that home with this tilted camera, which adds a little bit of tension or makes us a little bit unsettled when we look at it. I really wanted to focus on the negative space surrounding the character to give him lots of breathing room, so there's not too much distraction and our eyes can go right there, and it really helps define a silhouette around the character. Lastly, I wanted to make sure that we had good places for our eyes to focus. So I had one major focal point, which was his face, because that's the most detailed and expressive, but then I had two minor ones. His hand with the scissors, because that's definitely a part of the story that I wanted to tell, and then also balance that out with the clock on his chest, where the time is maybe running out, and it creates a little bit of a triangle, and so your eyes can bounce between them. A few other things that I do want to point out are that I have really intentional leading lines that point towards the focus. So these are lines that are just part of the environment that all point exactly where I want the viewer to look. I also have lines opposing to that, but they're repeating patterns that lead to the focus, so it's sort of a pattern leading up to where I want our eyes to go, but they also act as buffers to bounce our gaze back into the main part of the image. So if you start on the outside, these repeating patterns will bring you into the image, but then they're not as likely to lead you out. So that was very intentional as well. It took me a couple tries to get a composition that I was happy with, but not too many because I had already sketched out beforehand and thrown away all the ones that I thought were terrible. Sketching out definitely helped me with this, and it really saved a lot of time. Instead of getting it all modeled out in 3D and then having to throw it away and do it again, I just was able to pick something and stick with it and go with it from there. So it's sort of like a puzzle where all the pieces have to work together to create one cohesive whole. So then I continued to build up the character and bring out more of his forms and add a little bit of detail there. Then I had him rigged so that I could pose him the way I wanted him, and then I started setting up the lighting. So I continued to tweak the lighting all the way until the end, but let me show you how I built it up. So this isn't quite in chronological order, but I want to show you each key piece of the lighting, so maybe that'll help you with what you're lighting. Started out with complete black, absolutely nothing. And that way I can add lights one by one really intentionally and make sure that each light has a purpose. The main light is going to be the sun, and that's what's going to be sort of the main light source for the background, and it lights the environment, but not in a way that's really distracting. It helps the buildings pop out from one another, so it's not flat. I created it on an angle so that each building has a slightly different light cast on it, and it sort of varies across the surface of the buildings. So it helps the buildings pop out from each other, and also the light on the left pillars helps balance out the character. Next, I added a light to cast shadow and sort of fill in those areas. I also added a rim light to highlight the rim and also the top of the steps, which was really important because otherwise they would just sort of blend in and not look very interesting, and then all of that repetition would have necessarily been lost. So I wanted to have a good rim light to highlight those areas and that pattern. Then I added a light from below, so that also acts to fill in the character so there's not any deep shadows in his chest, but also implies that the stairs continue down. So it's sort of implied lighting, where if there's light coming from below there, there's definitely something down there. It creates the illusion that there's something more to the picture than what we see. So maybe he's walking down into a subway tunnel, or train station, or down into whatever, but the fact is there that he's going down into something and there's more there than what we see. Then I used a spotlight to isolate the character and really help pop him out from the background. Added a couple internal lights to show off the chest a little bit because it seemed a little dark in there, and also to give him a little bit of life. Lastly, I added a warm glow around some of the edges to give it sort of a hearty glow, maybe from trash can fires from homeless robots or something, I don't know, but just a little something to warm up the edges and give it a nice glow. So then I built up the texturing and shading. Lastly, I added some color correction, which helped pop out the character. I made the character a little bit more orange, more gold-like, and then also kept the sky nice and blue with some shadows. Just helped to sell the effect, and we'll definitely go over color correction in another video. If you take anything away from this video, I really hope that it's that you can sketch first, and that'll save you a lot of time in the long run. That if you focus on storytelling, you'll get a lot more interesting image than something that might look cool at first, but there's no substance to it, and it's not going to be memorable at all. Put details where they matter at the most important point of the image, so you're not wasting time putting a whole bunch of detail in the background where nobody's really going to see it. Use the composition to tell a story and direct the eye exactly where you want it to go. So don't just use compositional rules for the sake of rules and be like,
hey, I used the rule of thirds.
Why'd you do that?
I don't know.
So make sure that when you're using rules that they have a direct purpose and that they're actually serving to communicate what you want to communicate. Also, on that subject, make each light have a purpose, whether that's to cast a shadow, highlight an edge, or give the sense of space or depth. So have fun with it, just go for it. Don't be afraid to change things along the way. Create something that means something to you, and just enjoy the process along the way. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe or comment if you like this kind of video, and I'll see you next time.